Hey guys, Bix Weir, Roota.com. This is a private road behind the scenes look at my research into the Grand Canyon. I want you guys to digest this as you will. It's not in any specific order. Um, what I try to do, there's not a lot of information. There's not a lot of third party information saying, hey Bix, I was involved in this and I know all about it. Nobody's allowed to talk about it because it is so important. It has to do with our financial system and how it survived all these years and why the Federal Reserve was created in the first place. Probably one of the biggest secrets held um, on planet Earth at the moment. But it's not all that secret, as I will show you. So when I went through the Carrie Cassidy interview the other day, she kept saying, well, who do you know? How do you know this stuff? And I said, I put the pieces together. I can lay out all the facts for you, which I tried to do. You can only do it to a certain point on that level. But here I'm going to show you kind of behind the scenes how this theory came to be, the theory that the Grand Canyon Gold really changed the way humanity has lived for the past 100 years with the need for the invention of the Federal Reserve and how that system's been managed. A lot of it links up to the Road to Roota stuff, which I will show you. But let's just go through some of the stuff. And this is very casual private road adventure. So I'll be holding some stuff up and show you on the screen as well. I found this article. This is the article from the New York Times in 1912 that was plastered. And if you put yourself in the mindset of 1912, what was going on, there was about 250 to 300 million ounces of gold, in monetary gold, around the world. At least that's the official numbers. And about half of that was in coin form, people using it and storing it and having it in coin. And the other half was held by central banks of the world, or the banking system in general. There weren't a lot of central banks. I think England had the only central bank back then, but it was held by central banks and governments, mainly by governments, or the central banks that were controlled by governments. So the release of this information is huge. Now, I'm not saying this article specifically was the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Because at the time, the people who were trying to put together the Federal Reserve System, the people that G. Edward Griffin talks about in his book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, they were printing stories in the New York Times. They had the Times under their control, pushing for the need for a central bank. So it is, and when I first found it, I said it is possible that this is a plant article in order to push certain people within the government into saying, "Oh my God, we have to control this situation. If all this gold gets released to the population, which would be 10 times what was already in circulation in the world, much less in the United States, it would destroy the value of the gold-backed. It wasn't even gold-backed. Gold was money back then. Destroy the value of the purchasing power of gold. It would destroy the society's hierarchical situation. It would concentrate all the wealth into whoever was mining this gold, this group out of Chicago, and it would change everything around the globe. And that's why Woodrow Wilson was frightened into doing this. Let's start off talking about this. I read a little in the video this morning, but let me read you some of the most important parts. A tell of vast riches in the Grand Canyon. Men engaged in gold dredging operations expect to astonish the world. And then it talks about the steamboat, which I'll talk about in a second. I did a lot of research into that, and there was some amazing things I found about it. So the idea was they found this huge, vast amount of gold in the Grand Canyon. It's so gigantic, and some of the facts to back it up, so that this is not just a made-up story. It's all the money that was spent, the steam engines, the hydraulic machinery that was set up, the barges that were brought into this very, very rural part of the Grand Canyon. I mean, it was difficult to get there as an individual scaling these, going over this land that was just, it's crazy. If you want to get a good idea of what it looks like, watch the movie McKenna's Gold. McKenna's Gold is truthfully, it's the story of what was written in the Arizona Gazette article in 1909. But McKenna's Gold was, it's got the blind guy who was Seth Tanner, this blind guy who supposedly originally found the caves of the Hopi Indian that held the Egyptian artifacts and then the gold and all that, and the Indians blinded him. And this is a true story back in the late 1800s. And then they weaved it into the movie McKenna's Gold in 1969. But here's the deal. That article from the Arizona Gazette, the 1909 article where it talks about the cave and the pyramids in the Grand Canyon, that wasn't found until the archives were all put on its microfiche from the Arizona Gazette. So it was found in the early 1990s, and yet this movie, which displays exactly what was going on back then, theoretically, that nobody knew about, was made in 1969. So really interesting information. There's a lot of very famous actors in that, Gregory Peck and Telly Savalas. But it's really cool to see. It's also got the landslide at the end of the movie that covers up the gold, so the gold's never actually brought into the markets, which is the same thing that happens in the Road to Roota comics with Roota losing Colorland because of a landslide. Anyway, let's get going into this, and here are the key parts of this article that I want to point out. And those are the parts, and I tell everybody I talk to, go to roadtoroota.com and you can download these articles. In the left side of the website, there's a resources tab, and let me show you where it is. roadtoroota.com. Go to roadtoroota.com. There it is, roadtoroota.com. That's the Road to Roota website. Hopefully you guys have been through every single one of the 3,000 articles I've written, because they all have archives at the bottom. But if you go on the left side, you can see this resources tab. Click on that tab. All kinds of things about chemtrails and Bitcoin. Right here is the New York Times article. This is an actual, I have archived this and I have printed copies because I know someday this link will go away. But this is the New York Times directly from their website. You can see query New York Times. And I click on it and voila, there it is. Okay, so it's the real deal. And let's go down. And, it's not like anybody knew about this. It was archived along with the New York Times has archived almost all their publications going way, way back. So if you're interested in the past and want to try to find some information on something that's hidden, you can go to the New York Times archives. There's a fee to join, but you can do searches. And I was searching for the early days of the Federal Reserve and how gold was related to the Federal Reserve. And that's how I found this article. Nobody, even the guy who scanned this article originally, had no idea how important this was. Anyway, moving on. Some of the things I want to talk about is the quantities and specific nature of what was in this article. And the exact spot they're talking about, which I have done massive amounts of research on, the exact spot where the Golden Grand Canyon is and where the secret caves of the pre-American Indians, supposedly in Hopi folklore, this is where the ant people took the Native American Indians when there was a cataclysm coming. The ant people took the Indians underground, and this has to do probably with some kind of solar changes that there's evidence of in the past. But it was found in the early 1900s. This gold article is in the exact same spot, and there's more things that happened in the spot. But let's talk about it. It says this concern took its station at Lee's Ferry, Arizona. Now, Lee's Ferry is a very interesting spot because I think it's like 50 or 100 miles in both directions. There's no place to cross the Colorado River except at Lee's Ferry. Lee's Ferry became very important at the time. There's a big story how John Lee, who had set up this place to cross the Colorado River, and what happened to him, and all the conspiracies. I've read all these books and articles. It's hard to tell you all at one spit. I'm just going to give you a lot of the things that I looked at. Okay, John Lee, who was executed as the leader of the Mountain Meadow Massacre of the Mormons, took refuge for it some time. It was at this point where the Colorado emerges from the sand hills through which it has burrowed its way for more than 150 miles and begins to cut its way into the Marble Canyon, not coming to the plain level again until it reaches the border of California. So when you think about the Colorado River, you think about the Grand Canyon. The Colorado River goes through the Grand Canyon. The whole story that it was cut from an earth shakeup that emptied a lake. One of the Great Lakes was bigger or something. One of those stories is, I don't believe it. I do believe in Cliff's theory that it's an earth expansion event, and it's an electrical event that took place kind of like lightning striking the earth, huge, which created a crack. Nobody knows, but that makes more sense than the river was carved over the millennia, or the canyon was carved over the millennia by the water. Anyway, so we kind of know the spot. The spot is where the Colorado River is connected to the Little Colorado River. It's somewhere. If I took a circle, I'd circle about 50 miles in all directions of there because of the steamship that was brought in and the barges for the mining of the gold. And it was going 30 miles upriver or downriver, and it was within a 30-mile radius. I'll expand it to 50 miles because there could be in this article a lot of misinformation, because who would really tell anybody where they're mining this gigantic seam of gold? They wouldn't be exact. But given all the things that went on there, all the money that was spent in that area between 1909 and 1912, when this article came out in 1912, it's clear that something huge was going on, gigantic. And then it talks about how remote this spot is, hugely remote. But let's talk about the amount of gold they were talking about. And they talk about bringing in the 50-ton barge and two 100-ton barges and a 50-ton steamboat from San Francisco. Now, remember, this is not the day of, we can ship this overnight FedEx. We're talking train to horse and carriage type of, and then assemble on site. Okay, F.D. Wilson, who has been conducting operations for the Chicago concern, has come out of Lee's Ferry to report to his principals and make further arrangements to carry on his work. He declares that the whole field has been developed. When the whole field has been developed, the supply of gold in the world will have increased by billions with a B. I know that it will be difficult to comprehend that I have a correct conception of the wealth that is buried in the banks of the Colorado Canyon, he says, but I can demonstrate every statement I make to be absolutely true, and that my chief shortcoming is the inability to comprehend the vastness of the riches that lie along the great stream. At Lee's Ferry, remember that. That's right where the confluence of the Colorado River and the Little Colorado River. Lee's Ferry are mountainous deposits of marl silts that contain the wealth. Surmounting these is a sort of capstone formation that contains equal billions of values. These harder formations, however, are a little more difficult treatment. Underneath is this stony cap is the softer silt that practically melts like sugar under the hydraulic treatment. Experimentation and tests repeated and rechecked 1,000 times over have demonstrated conclusively that the soft silt contains 50 cents per yard in gold with a little silver and, strange as it may seem, considerable quicksilver, which is mercury, I believe. That is pretty strange. Exposed to the site are billions of yards of this silt containing more billions of dollars in wealth. Remember, 1 ounce of gold was $20 back then. Of the precious metal than the human mind can possibly grasp in computation. For 2 years, we have been experimenting. Now, there you go. We got 2 years of work going on. And remember when the Arizona Gazette published their article about finding the cave was 1909, and this is, June 19th, 1912. Okay, where are we? For 2 years, we have been experimenting on the methods of extracting and saving the gold and other metals. The effective plan has at last been worked out, and that district is about to come into the mining world of activity in startling fashion. I don't wish to be understood as meaning that this is going to be any proper place for a poor prospector, for it will be nothing of the kind. It is a place for strong companies and no others. A great deal of money must be expended. Go back to the top here. On proper equipment. Food can be obtained only by men who have big wagon freight trains to transport it to the centers of activity. Only, you notice they say centers of activity. Only companies financially able to conduct large operations can cope with the situation, and the poor man would starve to death trying to get a foothold. Up the Colorado River, 150 miles, there is another great outcropping of the silt, which is being developed by a concern largely financed in this city and Denver. This extends for more than 18 miles. Then it dips down and has been traced only once more before the deposit at Lee's Ferry is again found. It is believed that other deposits can be tapped in Marble Canyon if that is ever made accessible. So that's what got me thinking, oh my God, just how many billions of ounces are here. And, tack that on with all the other mysteries about gold that we have talked about for years. The Yamashta's gold, I think I have the book somewhere up there, was amazingly documented by Peggy and Sterling Seagrave. Get that book and read it. If you don't believe that remember, the mainstream tells us right now, I think there's 190,000 tons of gold in the world, which is like 6 billion ounces. It's a complete lie. Absolutely 100% lie. There's a hell of a lot more gold. And read the Peggy and Sterling Seagrave book, which outlines approximately 300,000 tons of gold in Yamashta's gold that was hidden in the Philippines. And then you can read the Karen Lee Bixman article on the gold that is hidden at Chocolate Mountain in the 1990s. It's called the Great Gold Heist, of the certain people, Dianne Feinstein leading the way, of securing that gold. And now Feinstein has increased the size of the Desert Wildlife Preserve and the military establishment at Chocolate Mountain, so that hundreds of miles are now in full control by the federal government. That's an interesting thing when California says we're going to secede from the United States because of Trump. They're kind of forgetting that 41% of the land in California is owned by the federal government, and you can secede with your 59%, but you're not going to go near the places that have all this treasure because the U.S. federal government has an army, and the California State Guard can do something. The whole thing is just ridiculous. Anyway, so I'm just going to cruise through a lot of this information. This is an article on the original Arizona Gazette article, Explorations in the Grand Canyon, Mysterious. This is from 1909. This guy, S.A. Jordan, was the guy from the Smithsonian. If you know anything about the Smithsonian, their job is not to preserve the artifacts of America. It is to hide them, absolutely hide them. And that's a big conspiracy as well. G.E. Kincaid was the explorer that found. He worked for Jordan of the Smithsonian, and they were doing all this in 1909, probably 1908, going back to the original stories of the gold and the Egyptian artifacts and the tunnels and all that, from Seth Tanner, who was the blinded guy, who was kind of a guide to get people, to get the Smithsonian to where they needed to go. Really interesting stuff. One of the many mysteries. Here's my Grand Canyon gold file. As you can see, there's a lot of information, and I got books on the geology and the whole thing. I've been working on this for a long time, and never got to putting it together in a book. Someday I will, when I get extra time. But one of the things interesting about this Kincaid thing that I found interesting in today, a lot of this area is in the Marble Canyon area of the Grand Canyon. It's obviously the Grand Canyon is a huge state park and has a lot of protections of the federal government. Certain places you can't go. But interesting that this guy, G.E. Kincaid, was the guy who found the cave. It's called Kincaid's Cave. And I found out that today, this very day, in Marble Canyon, the archaeologist of Marble Canyon is a woman named Chris Kincaid. It's spelled exactly the same way. Is there a connection? I don't know. But too many coincidences. I'm sure it's a great granddaughter or something like that, being that Kincaid had found the cave and then his legacy turned into archaeologists in charge of the Grand Canyon archaeology, which is a huge thing because if they got to hide everything. 95% of the caves in the Grand Canyon have never been explored according to the Grand Canyon people, the national parks. They say it's because they're too dangerous. People will get hurt. That's ridiculous. So, very interesting article there. And then it gets into, Teddy Roosevelt was a nut about the Grand Canyon, and mainly because they found the gold and they said, "Oh my God, Mr. President, you got to go there and check it out." And remember, getting to the Grand Canyon was not easy back then. Weeks on wagon trains and things like that. There was no railroad connection to the Grand Canyon until about 1908, 1909. So Roosevelt was a nut for the Grand Canyon. He called it a national monument and secluded a certain area. And I have a map of the area within the Grand Canyon somewhere in these files. Because a lot of my time and effort has been working on tracking down where exactly is it. Because I want to go see it. Not thinking in my mind, this is probably the most secure spot in the world. No one's going to even get close to seeing it. But, yeah. So, I printed out a map of the Grand Canyon area where Roosevelt turned it into a national monument. And the area is, I did a circle of all the mountains in that area. And this is within the area, right in the middle of the heart of the area, that they made a national monument, which gave it a lot of protections. And in that area, I'm going to read you the names of the mountains that are in the area. If you remember the Grand Canyon, it's got mountains that look like pyramids, right? So the names of some of these mountains within the spot that Theodore Roosevelt cordoned off: the Shiva Temple, the Buddha Temple, Isis Temple, Tower of Ra, Cheops Pyramid, Zorander Temple, Brahma Temple, Deva Temple. It just went on and on. It's all Egyptian names. So you link up that article about the Egyptian artifacts and all that stuff, and the intense interest of the United States into that area, and then you flip over the back of the dollar and you have the pyramid. There's just too many coincidences. So went over a lot of this stuff, and then in 1919, Woodrow Wilson, the guy who signed the Federal Reserve Act, turned most of the Grand Canyon into a national park. So it went from a national monument to a national park, which gives it even a lot more protections under the control of the U.S. government. And every president since Ronald Reagan has tried to get into the Grand Canyon and do some mining, and every president has been turned away. Absolutely, you can do searches on that. I'll put a lot of links below the video on the private road section so you can link up to a lot of this information. All right, moving on. Really interesting report right here. You can see that. It's called the Submerged Cultural Resources Site Report. So this report is done by the National Park Service, and it was in 1987. See, all these things, it just didn't end in 2009 or 2012 or whenever it was when they shut down the mining. It is a hotbed of activity ever since, and even to this day. Obama tried to get in there and mine for, he said, uranium. and was shut down. Bush Sr., Bush Jr., Clinton, they all tried to get in there and mine, and were all shut down by congressional committees. Because obviously they know what's going on in there. But this report, the idea behind this report of the Submerged Cultural Resources site report, right here is in 1987. I'll put a link to the site below. There's a picture of the Charles H. Spencer. That is the 50-ton steamboat that was put on the Colorado River. Remember, the Colorado River is extremely difficult to navigate. And there's different times of the year you can't even go on it because the water's rushing too fast. But this is the middle of the Grand Canyon too. I mean, you had to, each one of these pieces and all the metal had to be brought in on the back of a train. It was a lot of money. But this report in 1987 was to basically designate this spot the Submerged Cultural Resources Site, and it gives it a lot more protection. So this, you can still go to Lee's Fort and see the Charles H. Spencer, what's left of it. It's all deteriorating underwater and it's half sticking out. Let's see if they have more pictures. Pictures are always fun. That's what it looked like in 1915 after it was abandoned, right there. And of course they can't take it out because you can't get anything out. They would have to disassemble the whole thing. And there's a picture of it in 1973. And remember, this report is coming from the Glen Canyon National Park. And who today is the archaeologist? It's Chris Kincaid. Love the conspiracy stuff. But I learned a lot about the site and a lot about what was done in this area at the time through this report. It's an amazing report, and it does say that the USGS, the U.S. Geological Society, and the Smithsonian had offices, right? They took the old Glen Ferry, it was a building, and they built it out a little bit and had offices there all the way up to, I think it was the 2000s. So it's insane that all this stuff goes on there and nobody even knows about it. Absolutely nobody. So if you're interested in all the backstory of these millions and millions of dollars and literally gold, it was gold was money back then, spent just to shut this thing down, go check out this report. Here's another really amazingly interesting stuff that you got to know about, the cryptography and the Economist magazine and all that stuff. Here's the Economist magazine from 1988. That's the conspiracy thing people keep talking about. It said, get ready for a world currency. It had the date 2018 right here. 10 Phoenix, and then this, it's got the Rothschild's emblem on the top, and then the burning fiat. You can easily see today how we're getting close to that. But this is the thing that really gets my attention. This zero with the circle, I talked about it with Cliff in the Three Amigos video. Cliff has more information than I've ever heard on it. That it is a ancient Illuminati symbol. I'm not sure. He named off like 3 or 4 things in that video: the duality, the change, the big change that's coming. Could mean all kinds of things, but it goes back to this weird thing that I found back before I found the Roota stuff. I found this the site on the International Association for Cryptographic Research, and there's an article that names the 10 biggest secrets in the cryptography world that no one's ever been able to decipher, and this is one of them. There are, I think it's 7 gold bars, and here's what the gold bars look like if you do a close-up on them. They're Chinese symbols, but all these uppercase letters, and it's some kind of cipher, they believe. And it's really interesting because if you look at the other bars, there's figures, and it, like this bar right here, talks about a $300 million loan, and the date was 1933. It says on the other bar. Remember what was going on in 1933? The confiscation of gold, and it looks like the U.S. did some kind of a rehypothecation of gold, borrowing gold from China, but $300 million worth of gold, which is a lot of gold, if you do the math at $20 an ounce back then, 300 million, 20 bucks an ounce is 1.5 million ounces of gold. That's a lot of gold, but it's not a lot of gold if you have billions and billions of ounces in the Grand Canyon. And here's why I think this is related to the Grand Canyon. If you look at one of these bars, which is right here, first of all, look at those symbols. There's that 0 with the slash through it. But look at this. Clearly, it's a canyon. And if we could read this cryptography, I think it would talk about the gold in the Grand Canyon. And in 1933, the confiscation of gold, it all makes sense that China was probably taken, say, and the U.S. said, hey, we have this gold here, but we're not going to release it. So can we borrow your gold to continue our monetary system because everything's falling apart? And I believe it happened. And there's a USA symbol. That's a close-up of it. And other interesting things about it. This one, I don't know what this is. And it kind of looks like the Grand Canyon because the Grand Canyon has those big, long, they look very fragile. They're not obelisks, but they're real stacks because of the way the geology works. And if you watch the movie McKenna's Gold, in the end, they're firing their guns, which sets off the shaking and then the collapse, the landslide, as they say. So a lot of this is Chinese writing, I believe, and has been translated already. And it talks about the 1933 gold loan. I think it was General Wang who was on the Chinese side, and more stuff that they really. I mean, there's a lot of cryptography in here, and that nobody knows. And today, it's still a mystery. So if you know anything about this, contact right here, Peter Bisno in Pasadena. Here's his number. Because these cryptography guys are. I mean, this is one of the very top mysteries of cryptography, including the Georgia Guidestones. There's some stuff in there that is on that list of the top 10 secrets in the world. But this one doesn't seem like such a secret, although I can't read that cryptography and all the stuff that was put on there. Anyway, more of the mystery, more of the things you put together, these things, and you come out with some. So this is McKenna's Gold. That's what the gold seam in the side of the Grand Canyon would look like. And here's a picture of those stone formation type of thing. And this is all from McKenna's Gold. But all the McKenna's Gold information is right in line with that 1909 article in the Arizona Gazette, which wasn't discovered until 20, 30 years after McKenna's Gold was made, the movie. So there's a lot of things going on here. And all you mystery lovers, get out there and do the due diligence. Find what you can find. It's very exciting. Although I would not advise going to look for the gold in the Grand Canyon or these caves, because they have been, I believe the caves have been sealed off absolutely and camouflaged, and the military base in the Grand Canyon, they're not going to let you in. They absolutely won't let you in. And I recounted a story of somebody I know or an acquaintance who had been there and who got pulled over literally in him and his dad in his fishing boat when he was a kid. Military people on the banks with machine guns. They were taken to a military base within the Grand Canyon. He saw them removing a whole bunch of obelisks, which are the Egyptian tall things, like the Washington Memorial and all that. So yeah, very exciting if you're into conspiracy stuff. Watch McKenna's Gold. A very cool movie. Oh, there's another. I didn't link it here, but there's another amazing documentary on the airplane crash in 1956. There was this airplane crash that happened right over this exact spot, supposedly. And it was 2 jumbo jets. It was the largest airplane crash in the world at the time. 128 people died. But there's a documentary on YouTube. Just say Grand Canyon Gold or Grand Canyon airplane crash, and you'll get a great documentary. But there's so many conspiracies around that because they were finding, supposedly these planes disintegrated into so many pieces. They had to shut down the area, bring helicopters in for 2 weeks pulling stuff out. They didn't find 30 bodies. It's kind of like the 9/11 conspiracy in Shanksville, that the plane crashes into the ground and everything disintegrates. That type of thing. But for some reason, they had to shut down that part of the Grand Canyon in 1956 to allow these helicopters to fly in, grab all this stuff. We don't know what was in them, and fly out. Most likely had to do with taking gold out of this very remote part of the Grand Canyon. But who knows? That's the conspiracy side. But I didn't even know there was a plane crash in the Grand Canyon of 2 jumbo jets. The odds of that happening are like 1,000,000,000 to 1. That they were at the same altitude, the same speed. They're going into different directions. They took off from the same airport, and hundreds of miles away, they end up crashing. And impossible. One was going to up here, and one was going over here, and that there wasn't onboard radar at the time. And it's a big aviation thing they point to is why they put onboard radar onto airplanes. But the whole thing stinks of high heaven of a false flag type of event in order to get helicopters to shut down this part of the Grand Canyon. So more conspiracy stuff. And speaking of 1933, those of you who have followed the GATA work, followed the conspiracy of these 1933 gold-backed bonds that were found all over the place in Asia, in the Yamashta's caves and things like that. These are not fake. These are not fake. You can't fake something like that. And if you did, I mean, the ancientness of it, I mean, these are 80, 70, 80 years old. They look 70, 80 years old. So it would have had to be someone who decided to do this fake thing with trillions of dollars in gold-backed bonds back then. What was the reason? And then just let them sit all over the Philippines and Asia and in the banks for all these years, and then come out. There's just no reason to do it. And the ability at the time, I mean, you look at these, the cases, and there's the steel box within them. These are little cases within each one. Each of these hold massive amounts, and they're all, this is the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, right where it was funded by, that they were funding the supposedly the extraction of the Golden Grand Canyon, and then got shut down. And you look at and I think they're pretty much all from Chicago, and it all matches up to the gold found in the Grand Canyon. But there's a lot of secrets in gold, so you gotta take everything with a grain of salt. But that's what the bonds look like. These are 1934 series. It's 1933 and 1934 that all this was happening. Yeah, really cool stuff. If you're into that conspiracy, go for it. And of course, the U.S. government said it was all fraud. These aren't real, and nothing ever came of it. But if you're into that conspiracy stuff, go for it. Have a day. Look at this. These are bearer bonds, meaning that you got coupons, $1 billion, payable the bearer on demand, and $1 billion in gold right there. So it's either these are the $6 trillion that were seized in Zurich just recently. If we go to the website, can't get you to that website. Really interesting stuff, but all of it links back, and all is absolutely goes back to what we were talking about with what was going on at the time, hiding of the gold in there. But the U.S. wanted to rehypothecate, put some gold certificates out there, and they were able to. Really interesting stuff about portals of the underworld into the Grand Canyon National Park. I'll put the link to this Travel Channel video. They talk about the underground caves within the Grand Canyon, the cave system that was found. Really interesting stuff, and why it was all kept secret and things like that. What else we got? I'm just going to rattle off a few things now related to the road to Roota. Here's a list of like 13 things that I all kind of linked up. The theory of the opening of the Federal Reserve. Why did Woodrow Wilson sign the bill when he was so anti-banker? He was scared into the release of that gold would have destroyed the entire system, including the government. Seth Tanner, the Smithsonian conspiracy, the New York Times article, Woodrow Wilson's decision to keep the Fed, Secret of Jekyll Island, all that. The only thing that G. Edward Griffin missed was the reason they were doing it wasn't to give the control to the bankers. It was to save the system from all this gold that was about to come out. The pyramids on the back of the $1 bill. The U.S. Marines have a huge presence in the Grand Canyon. The Grand Canyon lawsuit. There was a lawsuit with Utah. It was a Supreme Court decision, actually. And I have that decision right here. Supreme Court in 1930. Right there, if you can see it. The United States versus Utah talks all about the exact spot we're talking about. Utah wanted to get control of the wealth in the banks of the Grand Canyon, and the U.S. said, get out of here, get out of the way. But it did go all the way to the Supreme Court, to a special master of the Supreme Court. All the presidents have been locked out. If you look at the new $100 bill, it has all that gold on it, ready to come into circulation. It says you have the right to overthrow your government, right above the 100. McKenna's gold, and what is the future of money? Did it change when the cryptos were invented? I think the good guys are at least trying to make that happen. And this page is about, I'm trying to narrow down where, this page right here, where these are just notes it might be, and here's some of my thoughts and some of the things I found out. It's where the Little Colorado enters the Grand Canyon. That's the general region. That's where Lee's Ferry is and all that. There's something called the Little Colorado Gorge that might have been the spot. The Snake River tributary meets the Little Colorado. A place called Annabas Gulch, which is kind of off limits. There's the Navajo Indians. There's the Hopi Indians. Sipapu is the sacred spot where the Hopi were taken underground by the Ant people. That's completely off limits. The Hopi salt mines completely off limits. The Zuni language has a lot of Egyptian words in it, and things like that. And this is like all this. Here's something really cool. It is a actual stock certificate from the company that originally was mining the gold in the Grand Canyon, a company called Black Sand and Gold Recovery Company. This is a stock certificate. Investment of $150 was made to get this stock certificate. I bought it for like $20 off eBay. So I might own part of the Grand Canyon gold. No, I doubt anybody has any claim on that. The fight is going to be. The other thing I want to talk about was the Indian reservation gambling casinos. Why is it that the United States gives the Indian tribes so much money, like billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars, because of the license to operate gambling facilities? I believe it is because the U.S. is really confiscating gold on the Native American Indian territory. So in payment, I think there's treaties that are being done behind the scenes. In payment, they said, hey, we'll give you all the money you want. You can make your tribes rich by starting up these gambling casinos. Oh, but by the way, we're going to have to confiscate all this gold. That's a theory, Bix Weir theory, that I haven't fully fleshed out, but getting there. So yeah, in 1908 is when Roosevelt locked up 800,000 acres, and he knew about the gold too. So that's at least okay. Here's an email from my contact, the guy who actually went with his dad when he was a kid, and he's done some research on this. And here's his take. And because I'm like, where is it? Where was it? Where was it? And, can't recall exactly, but he says it's where the Little Colorado River enters the Grand Canyon. It is at a gorge named Little Colorado Gorge, which is where the Snake River tributary meets the Little Colorado. Animus Gulch. Um, so I looked at that area and I don't know. I don't even know if you can hike there because of the dangerous caves. Um, he reasons it was in continuous use. He has hidden. Even Google Maps uh, has it blocked off. You know how Google Maps will, kind of cover up certain areas. That area is covered up. I mean, they go in there by air likely these days, not fixed wing, so helicopters or hovercrafts or whatever they're using. Uh, yeah, talks a lot about the graying out of the Google Maps of this area. And so there you have it. If you're interested in trying to find it, the funny thing is, if you do find it, you're just going to be stopped by the military and turned around. So why even go there? But I think there's just so much more information to come out about this. I am not the absolute expert on any specific thing in this area. There are people who know. There's people who've worked there, probably thousands of people. But I'm trying to piece together all the little pieces and put together, and it all absolutely fits with the Road to Roota theory and the Wishes and Rainbows. I'll show you the part if you go to the Wishes and Rainbows comic books from either 1981, these are all in the resources tab. These are from the Federal Reserve. I put them on my website in case the Fed ever takes them down, but the Fed still has them up. And if you go down to where Roota is looking for the colored flowers with the golden light and all that, she finds the golden flowers here, the golden sunlight. She finds Colorland. She brings the colored flowers back, and check out the gold light is needed for the flowers, all that stuff. And it is in caves. And this a place is called Cobblestone Canyon, which is the Grand Canyon. So they're looking, her and her buddy Rocky go looking for more colored flowers, and look, a rock slide has closed off the whole tunnel. Now what do we do? And look, there's this gets into the petrodollar, and Roota finds out that if you use the golden light to plant the black tears of the flowers, and shine gold on them, you can create more colored flowers. Those of you who've done the research on Road to Roota, I advise you to go figure out everything about Road to Roota. I did a video called Discovering the Road to Roota, which basically shows what the whole Road to Roota theory is about. But that the rock slide part is absolutely in line with a lot of the things right here. Roota and Rocky, and the rock slide closed off the whole tunnel. Same thing happens in the McKenna's Gold movie, which again was made after the 1909 article, but before it was discovered in the 1990s. And finally, there's this. I kept looking up at that guy, the foreman of the 1912 article from the New York Times. The guy's name is F.D. Watson or something like that. In here, there's F.D. Watson, who's been conducting the operations for a Chicago concern. So I'm searching for F.D. Watson, and lo and behold, I find the Federal Reserve System, its purpose and its work. And in there is, voila, F.D. Watson. Is it the same F.D. Watson? I do not know, but the connection is there, so I was excited, even though I read the stuff, and it wasn't anything, no smoking gun, but just another coincidence. Anyway, that's kind of a roundup. There's a lot I haven't talked about, but those are the big concepts, and there's little things I'm finding here and there. Thank you to everybody who's sent me information on the road on the Grand Canyon Gold. I've gotten a lot of these links from subscribers. I've got some awesome pictures from a subscriber who's got these old archives of pictures. And if you do a search on Road to Roota, on the Road to Roota website, right here there's a search button, and if you search for Grand Canyon, you will find 107 articles on the Grand Canyon. So that's kind of a summary of each. As I discovered this stuff, I kept putting it on the Road to Roota website. If you want to do more research on your own, go for it. Have a day. And if you find stuff that I haven't covered, please send it to me, bix@roodtoroota.com, because I'd love to put all these pieces together in a book. I've been working on it off and on, but truthfully, the more I get into it, the more new stuff I find. Um, it will happen one day. I just don't have the time to do it yet. Anyway, this is your Friday road trip for the end of October. Very exciting times next week with the release of the Kennedy papers, and I'm real excited about that because it could open a can of worms and a can of whoop ass on the deep state. Say, okay, you hid this from us for 50 years and that nobody thought could be possible. What else are you hiding from us? And what else is everything, basically? Bix Weir, I'll talk to you guys later.